Hello, lovelies. And yes, you are lovelies again, because I'm in a better mood. Looks like we're getting an election here in the UK on July the 4th. Which seems like a bad date to call an election on due to its association with independence from the United States. But still, we get a general election, finally. Everyone thought it was going to be in the autumn, but no, it's going to be on July the 4th. So, toddle on over to stopthetories.vote and register if you're someone who votes in the UK. Make sure that you have a photo ID of some kind that will be accepted at polling places, because the Tories have tried to gerrymander and rig votes by putting barriers in the way of it. And like I say, make sure you've got your ID and make sure it's one that's valid, because they are rather obvious in their attempts to fix the vote in terms of what ID they consider to be valid. I use my accursed driver's license. So the last time we had a Labour government come in was 1997, and I remember it well, bounding up the stairs onto a friend's apartment for a gaming weekend, happy because we finally had a change, because all I had really known for my life up until then had been Thatcher's Britain, which was a depressing, horrible, greedy, nasty place to live, with government enacting out-and-out homophobic legislation, privatising anything that moved, and just generally it was a shit time for everybody, except for a handful of people in the city and people who didn't understand that they were poor because of these policies. Doesn't feel the same this time around. Labour seem likely to win by a pretty wide margin, but it's not actually got that much to do with Labour as a party. It's much more to do with hatred of the Tories. And little wonder, really, because almost all of our current problems in the UK can be traced back to Tory policies and ideas and governments. Brexit, obviously. Our rivers are full of shit because of deregulation and privatisation. Our power and our heating is so expensive because of deregulation and privatisation. Our trains are absurdly overpriced, mostly because of deregulation and privatisation. There is a housing shortage here in the UK because largely of the Thatcher era right to buy scheme, which meant people could buy their council housing, their social housing, but that ended up discouraging local councils and so on from replenishing the stock or building new council housing, because it was no longer a reliable source of income for the council. So there was no mileage in providing roofs over people's heads anymore. It was just a massive cost that couldn't pay for itself. So that's their fault, which is weird because they're the party of homeowners. I think they allowed greed to get the better of them. The gap between rich and poor is now a gulf because of Tory corruption and taxation policies to enrich the already rich at the expense of everybody else and their services. Masses of children are now in poverty, and homeless and disabled people are dying, some of them starving to death, all because the government has withdrawn support for people in those positions and branded them all in negative ways. Something that's kind of slipped under the radar a little bit for most people, but which I'm aware of because my mum was a legal secretary before her retirement, is the withdrawal of legal aid. And that has also had a massively deleterious effect upon normal people's lives and probably contributed to prison overcrowding and miscarriages of justice. So in order to get to this electable position, though, unfortunately, Labour has had to compromise or remove many of their progressive policies and ideas, which is weird because by and large the British public is more progressive than the parties. It's just the left, as ever, is divided. This is not unlike the way the Democrats are centre-right in the US, but they kind of have tag-along progressives with them. But in order to get elected, due to the peculiarities of the systems in both countries, you end up with parties more conservative than where the public actually is. This centre-right, centre-Labour is not what we need in this country, but it's what can get elected under our system. And that is often a problem for Labour. In order to be electable, they have to sacrifice a lot of their natural support to try and get those small c conservative voters in various areas to vote for them, which it sounds paradoxical, but it removes parts of their overall vote share, makes it narrower, but due to the peculiarities of our system, makes them more electable. And that's not how things should work, really. So no one's particularly enthusiastic for Labour in their current form, or for Keir Starmer as a leader, but they will at least be slightly more focused upon people rather than donors. They're slightly more likely to invest slightly more money in social investment rather than in corruption and enrichment of the already wealthy. They're more likely a bit to help people rather than punish and demonize them, but it's all very thin gruel indeed, and we have to hope that we can push them further left once they're in government, or push them to make some necessary root and branch reforms once they're in government, hopefully with a thumpingly big majority, so that they can actually get things done. The real political battles will come after the election, and they will be attempts to try and get some sort of grassroots movement for proportional representation and for some kind of rapprochement with the European Union. But Labour are unlikely to back either because, well, same as last time. Before 1997, Labour were flirting with proportional representation as a policy. I believe the party members voted for it. But of course it was the existing first-past-the-post political system that gave them the big win that they got. And the same is likely to happen here. So from their point of view, or at least the leadership's point of view, the system is working fine because it gets them into government with a big majority. But if we shift to proportional representation, we're likely to get coalition, more progressive governments more often. So long term, that's going to be better for Labour and for progressives and the left as a whole. And I'm talking about the actual left throughout this entire conversation. But, their first past the post is going to give them this win, and if they do start to normalise our relationship with the European Union, they're afraid that that's going to cost them votes in the north, which was much more Brexit backing due to the depredations of the racist far right. I don't think they're really appreciating, but perhaps they will, that the win they're going to get, if they get it, and nothing is certain, is going to be in large part due to tactical voting and people's hatred of the Tories, as well as some other one-time things, like the relative collapse of the SNP in Scotland means Labour might pick up a couple more seats. And also, people like Reform UK nipping at the heels of the Tories, the very far-right people they're trying to appease, but they just end up feeding, that's going to nip away at the Tory vote share, and that's going to help Labour get elected, but that's unlikely to be the case at the next election, when that comes. So hopefully there are some people with a bit more foresight, and the anti-Tory coalition that has emerged can become a pro-PR coalition without suffering all the problems and division that previous movements have had when they try to become about more than one thing. It would be wonderful if we had proportional representation. I would love to be able to vote for a party that actually says something that I believe in, that I actually want, rather than just being a watered down set of policies that just happens to be against people that I don't want. But that is a luxury that we cannot have without some sort of proportional representation, or at least ranked choice voting at the minimum. But I see a lot of people for whom, the perfect is the enemy of the good. They won't vote Labour because of Labour's stance on Israel, perhaps, or some other key element. I mean, they're going to be better on Israel than the Tories, and is it really worth allowing the right and the far right to have an in just because you disagree with one aspect, one policy of a party, the only party that has any chance of dislodging the Tories? I can't get behind that, even though Labour has certain policies that I don't agree with. All things considered, it's better than continuing with the current status quo. So I hope people will hold their nose and vote for whatever party it is in their constituency that has the best chance of getting rid of the Tories. So again, make sure you've got ID of some kind. Make sure you're registered to vote in the right place that you're going to be on July the 4th. And go and register at stopthetories.vote, please. Zang. Rob Necronomicon's art has graced several Postmortem Studios products, and Rob has also produced some stock art pieces you can use in your own projects or at your gaming table. Rob's stark, dark graphical style is perfect for horror, old school fantasy, and dark future projects. You can buy Rob's art from Postmortem Studios at DriveThruRPG or at post-mort.com.